Author Preface. This is saying the book of the History of the Popes, Volume 1. The publication of a new History of the Popes from the conclusion of the Middle Ages, drawn from original sources, cannot be considered a superfluous task. Sorry, I probably should read that again. The publication of a new History of the Popes from the conclusion of the Middle Ages, drawn from the original sources, cannot be considered a superfluous task. Apart from the special interest attaching to the annals of this most ancient and still most vigorous of dynasties, from a purely scientific point of view, a new work embodying the substance of the numerous monographs of the last 10 years with additions and corrections from fresh original documents seems urgently called for. Ronke, I hope that's how you pronounce it, Ronke, the first in the importance of all Protestant German historians, owe his fame to his, quote, Lives of the Popes in the 16th and 17th centuries, which appeared in 1834 through 1836, and which, even in the most recent editions, essentially represents the state of historical research at that period. The alterations made by the aged author are, with the exception of its continuation of the year 1870, confined to a small number of points. He gives but a summary notice of the Renaissance age, our knowledge of which has been immensely increased during the last few decades by the labors of learned men in Italy, as well as in Germany and France. In the latter country, especially by those of the indefatigable Eugene Mintz. A thorough acquaintance with that period is essential preliminary to the comprehension of the 16th century. When His Holiness Pope Leo XIII generously opened the secret archives of the Vatican to students, it became evident that the history of the popes during the last 4 centuries would have to be rewritten. Ronk, Burckhardt, Volk, Gregorius, and Cretin all wrote on the Renaissance age before these archives were accessible, and even Rumont, whose trustworthy and exhaustive history of the city of Rome has been of the greatest use to me, gives but a few specimens of the rich treasures they contain. Accordingly, my first task during a somewhat prolonged residence on 2 occasions in the Eternal City was to make myself thoroughly acquainted with them. My studies were greatly facilitated by the kind of assistance afforded me by the custodians, and I soon became convinced that Perez's observation, the keys of St. Peter are still the keys of the Middle Ages, is also applicable to our times. In addition to the secret archives of the Vatican, I found while in Rome, partly by my own exertions and partly by the aid of friends, historical materials of great value in a number of other archives, which had hitherto been almost inaccessible. Among these are the consistorial archives, the archives of the Lateran, which unfortunately have not been classified, of the Inquisition, of propaganda, of the Sistine Chapel, of the Secretariatship, of briefs, and the Library of St. Peter's. Nor must the treasures of the Vatican Library be passed over, especially at Ronk and Gregorius were only able to inspect a small number of these manuscripts. My researches in the inexhaustible mine of the papal collection were supplemented by those which I made in the libraries and private archives of Rome. I visited the public and semi-public libraries, which are celebrated throughout the literary world, as the Anglica, the Barbarian, the Casinatense, the Chiga, the Corsina, and the Borghese, and the Bon Campania libraries, the archives of the Anima, of the Campo Santo al Vaticano, and of the Santo Spirito, as well as those of the Roman princes, which in many cases are not easily of access. Among these, the archives of the Colonna and the Grattani and the Ricci families held an unexpected amount of treasures, while others, for example, those of the Orlandescalchi and the Orsini, were comparatively barren. The overwhelming mass of documents before me decided me only to begin my systematic investigation of the Roman archives at the middle of the 15th century, which we may consider as the period closing the Middle Ages and forming the transition between two great epochs. Ample as are the historical materials to be found in Rome, I could not limit myself exclusively to these sources without incurring the danger of being one-sided. I therefore extend my investigations to the other archives in Italy, especially those of the more or less important Italian powers, which were in constant communication with the Holy See, and which sent ambassadors to Rome at an early date, more frequently than is generally supposed. The diplomatic correspondence of the Sforza and the state archives at Milan long detained me, and I was able to fill up the gaps existing in it from the Ambrosian Library, and afterwards from the National Library of Paris. Florence, Vienna, Mantua furnished an unlooked for amount of documents, most of which are still unknown. Lucca is not so rich, but for Modena and Naples, I've gathered much that is of value for my own work. I need hardly say that in my various journeys, I did not neglect the numerous rich libraries and important municipal archives which are scattered through Italy. I also investigated the collections of the manuscripts in France and Germany, in several places, as for example at Aix in Provence and Treves. I made interesting and valuable discoveries, extracts from manuscripts which I believe to be an unpublished are marked in this work by an asterisk. It was impossible in the appendix to find places for all the matter before me, but I intend at a later period to publish a large collection of manuscripts connected with the history of the popes. The documents which are to form part of the proposed volume are designated by two asterisks. I owe a debt of gratitude in the first place to His Holiness Pope Leo XIII, who has most graciously been pleased to take an interest in my work and to encourage me in the prosecution. Then to their eminence Cardinals Jacobini, Hergenrother, and Myrtle, His Excellency Count Parr, Austrian Ambassador to the Holy See, Monsignor de Montel, and Mezerniski, and Herr Wilhelm Huffer in Rome. Also to Father Uriel, Jesuit, and Dr. Gottlob, the latter of whom placed all at my disposal a number of documents related to the war against the Turks. I'm also greatly indebted to the Minister of Public Worship and Education in Vienna for his kindness in regard to the transmission of manuscripts, and to the custodians and officials of the archives of libraries I visited for the assistance they have so obligingly afforded me in my investigation. Obligingly afforded me in my investigation. I beg them all to accept my sincere thanks. The second volume of this work will conclude the history of the Renaissance age and will appear as soon as possible. The subject matter of the 4 other volumes, which will probably complete my undertaking, will be the 3 great events of the history since the Renaissance: the Great Disruption in the Western Church, the Catholic Restoration, and the Modern Revolution. Ludwig Pastor, the 15th of August, 1885. The Assumption. No, wait. Assumption's the 14th. No, that should be 15th. Oh, brother, I have to look it up. I should know that. It is the 15th. I know it's the 15th. Yeah, it's 15th, right? Yeah, 15th. Assumption of Mary. Okay. Yeah. All right. Sorry about. Yeah, you're about to find out that my pronunciation skills, especially in Italian, is terrible. My reading skills not that good either. The whole point. One of the points is for me to read this stuff, but also so I'll read. Second point is to practice my pronunciation, and you can tell right now that I have a hard time doing both. Anyway, all right. Well, I'm gonna turn this off because we have the next. We'll start doing the next chapter. Not the next chapter, but the first chapter.